Hello, and welcome back to Owens Bay. In today's episode, I'm going to be working on what I consider to be some of the more challenging areas to build on in City Skylines 2, those pesky little transitional areas between different zones and regions within your city. In this particular case, it is between the university town directly below us and the industrial area that you can see off in the distance, indicated by those smokestacks. There are also several other aspects about this particular area I'm going to be building on, which also add to the challenge. The area I'm going to be working on is that empty space at the end of the road directly ahead of us. My name is Geifs, and let's get started. Okay, before we get started on today's project, there is something I want to complete in the university town. Now, I had this little bit of space left down here. It's essentially going to be a park. And I wanted to add some of the leisure buildings from the new assets. And we're going to use this little tea house because I think it looks, obviously it's a tea house and it's going to function like that, but I think it also would make a very nice looking clubhouse for a lawn bowling club. Now, the reason I'm putting this in here is it's directly across the street from the university, and it seems like the sort of that university people would be engaged in. I did a quick little look up online to figure out the actual dimensions for a long bowling court, and I hope these are more or less correct. They probably are not 100% correct. It doesn't need to be. It just has to have a look about it that suggests lawn bowling. Now, I've noticed since the update, there's definitely been a change to the saturation levels of the colors in game, and I'm not sure I really like it. It's really bringing out the default map surface here for the grass, the Volcoria map surface, which I have a love-hate relationship with. It's wonderful for all the wilderness areas on the map, like the mountain areas and stuff. It looks great, but I don't really necessarily like it for the urban areas. And now with the saturation dialed up on it, it's even a little more obvious. Luckily, we now have new grass surfaces, which are these very nice semi-transparent surfaces that blend with it very well and do a really good job of making it look like it belongs a little better. Now I'm going to get a little fancy here with the edging around the lawn bowling court. We're going to do a tile edge, a little low brick wall around it, and a hedge. There are several new grass textures. Now for the park, I'm using this one, and to be honest, for this particular surface, it's not necessarily my favorite, but we're going to keep it here. And unfortunately, it doesn't behave with the sidewalks and roads like the regular grass texture, so you have to be a little more careful where you place it. We're just going to put in a few more trees to fill it in a little bit. Okay, now on to our transitional areas. There's 3 different types I'm going to be covering in this episode. And the first one here is I have obviously this industrial area, and I need a reason why it's going to stop expanding to the north, which is where we are right here. And one of the easiest ways to deal with this sort of thing is to put in a physical barrier to stop expansion. And in this case, I decided to go with a wetland. I've said this in earlier episodes. My region, being the Pacific Northwest, needs much more wetlands in it than it already has. And that's what I'm going to put in here. Now, I don't have a creek or stream or anything here to indicate where the water is coming from. So I'm going to imagine that it's a buried creek that it's like under the university town. And we're going to use the sewage pipe here for kind of the culvert. So the next transitional area I'm going to be working on is a residential transitional area. So this is between the town, and now we have an elevated road and the rail line wrapping around it. This is not a desirable area to live, but people still live here. What I'm going to be imagining here is we're going to use some of the Eastern European houses here to play the role of employee housing for the rail yard. This would have been built maybe at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's not particularly nice, but it's there. We're also going to, of course, a lot of this area probably would have been redeveloped over the years, and we're going to be using these UK homes, which are a perfect stand-in for a particular style of home built during the 1980s. And we're going to be using these ones as well, which also are pretty good for just a generic house. I'm going to be deleting away pretty much all the props. I don't want any of this for what I'm building. Now here I'm going to start drawing in the grass surface that I think works the best with the Valcoria surface, and it's this particular grass surface. It blends in quite nicely. Now in the last episode I was showing off some new road detailing techniques, and I'm going to incorporate one of them here quite extensively throughout the entire neighborhood. Basically I'm trying to make these streets here look a little more older and a little more worn down. And I'm just going to do this little section of this one road here as a demo, and then I'm going to do the rest of it off camera. It's a considerable amount of work. I wouldn't necessarily want to do this over the entire city, but it's definitely nice for if you want like a little tiny spot where you want to do some extra detailing. I was all very excited about this technique in the last episode, and I still am. I think it's great. It adds so much variety and detail to the roads, but let's be honest, we still need custom road assets. This is a considerable amount of work to do over a large scale, and custom roads would make this much, much easier. Essentially, for this particular neighborhood, I want it to be, it's impoverished. It's not a nice place to live, and the property here is pretty cheap, and the people here don't have a lot of money, so they're not going to have a lot of stuff in their yards. We're also going to be using a tree barrier to reduce some of the noise from the railroad line right beside here. And we can see how the grass texture really calms down that rocky surface that's in the map surface. Blends it in really, it blends very nicely with it. It just, you can still see the rocks, but they're not nearly as obvious. And here's a happy accident with overlaying grass over the gravel pathway. I get this effect. I wasn't expecting it. So I feel there's going to be a lot of happy accidents like that over the next little while as I play around with these new surfaces. Now for this employee housing, this is going to be pretty, like the reason I went with the Eastern European, like these level ones, is they look a little more run down. Just strip away all the assets or the props from the actual homes and leave them fairly bare. I also sprinkled a few nicer looking homes throughout the area because some of it was rebuilt over time. As you can see with all the lines down here, this was a considerable amount of work to actually detail. For this little chunk of land sandwiched between right up against the rail line, I'm going to put in what I consider to be a little bit of light industrial. It's just essentially a warehouse plus a commercial building, and I linked them together with the surfaces to suggest that they are just one single business. And I'm trying to blend in the edge here a little bit with some of the newer surfaces. Now this cobble surface, I don't really use that often. I find it difficult to work with, or at least difficult to make it look good. But I thought I'd give it a try here, and right now you can see it right here, and it's okay, but it's missing something. Now I'm going to put over top of it one of the grass surfaces. And we now get this effect, which this is great. I can think of so many different uses for this. And here you get a really good look at the contrast between the vanilla surfaces and the now modded detailed surfaces. Okay, now the next transitional area. This is a bit of a strip of retail and offices. It's sandwiched between the overhead road and the industrial area and the rail yard below it. It's there to fulfill a narrative purpose, not necessarily a functional one. So I replaced it with a prop version, and I'm not ready to get into the actual industrial or the train yard in this episode. That's going to be a couple episodes off yet. And I need to play around with it. I did embed a few functional industrial buildings inside it to give it a bit of function. And I'm going to add another train station here to service the new commercial office area and the industrial area as well. We got Empire Meadows. I'm just going to shorten this for Empire for now. I still need a name for the university town, which I haven't made any decisions on yet. So if anybody has any ideas, let me know. I find I'm having a bit of issues with garbage pickup, so I'm going to include this waste disposal or waste treatment plant here for just to add a few extra garbage trucks to the region. The vanilla crematorium, I used to love that building. I thought out of the vanilla set, it was the best looking one. But because of the never ending death wave I had to experience, which is thankfully now over, I had to spam so many of them over so much of the map that I'm really sick of them. I'm also going to be using some more of the leisure buildings here. I forget which one this is, but I also have the bowling alley here. So I thought it was fun that we have lawn bowling for the university and regular bowling for everybody else. And I'm going to include one of the new Southwest motels here. These are great. You see so many of these all over the place. I'm going to attach to it one of the prop versions of it, just to make it more custom, like a unique building. This segment of it will be non-functional. And now begins the very long process of figuring out how to put all the buildings in here. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this particular transitional area is difficult. The first one is it's the road leading into town. It has all that kind of urban sprawl you'd usually expect to see along those types of stretches, gas stations, fast food restaurants, strip malls, all that sort of stuff. It's also an industrial area, so that indicates buildings that you'd find here, and it's all on a bit of a hill. Unfortunately, in City Skylines 2, that is really a challenging thing to build on and to make it actually look good. It takes time shuffling buildings around to figure out how everything will knit together in a way that makes sense. Of course, my unconventional road layout here doesn't help matters at all either. Another thing City Skylines 2 is not good at is if you're dealing with anything other than a grid, building placement is much more challenging. I quickly realized this 2-lane road was not going to cut it, and we're going to expand it to 4 lanes. I'm using buildings from several different packs here. It's some of the northeast commercial buildings, the southwest office buildings, some vanilla buildings. I have a few buildings in here that indicate a bit of age to the area, so they look a little older, and then a lot of the office buildings are fairly new, indicating that they might be much newer constructions. Now, for the very first time in a very long time, my demand bars are functioning and showing things, and I've realized that I need much more industry than I do. That's something that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Probably get into the next episode. Yeah, the simulation's actually now being a little more responsive, which, like I said, I haven't had to deal with for a very long time now. My demand bars have been maxed out for months and months, no matter what I built. And I almost forgot to include it here, but yeah, we definitely need a gas station out here. I'm not going to get too crazy with the surface detailing here. I think it's more about the placement of the buildings here more than it is about the surfaces. One thing I'm really bad at doing is paying attention to what's actually like on the sides of the buildings. Like these buildings here have back entrances, so I really should include something to allow people to get to them. So I'm going to include a road. And add some decorative features to some of these little awkward areas here. So I thought this little gazebo here would be fun. I'm going to be using pedestrian paths and quay walls to help with some of this uneven terrain. It's not perfect, as we'll see here. This parking lot here in particular really shows, even with this, you can't get a flat area. I don't know how long I spent on this one trying to flatten that out. And there really comes a point where you have to say, okay, I've really spent a lot of time trying to get this to work. It's not going to work. So we're just going to do what we can here to make it look as good as we can and hide the mistakes or hide the terrain that isn't going to cooperate. And the easiest way to do that is use trees. The game can be really deceptive with the elevation changes. Like these train lines you see here, these are like a meter, which is approximately 3 feet. That's not quite right, but it's good enough, right? You get 2 or 3 of those in a row and you're now dealing with about 10 feet of change in elevation. So it actually is, when you think about it, that's a bit of a jump there. So it could be a little deceptive that way. Because nothing is truly square in here, the ready-made parking lots don't really work all that well. Pretty much everything in here is be a custom parking lot. And like I was talking about in the last episode, because the road layout is unconventional, not square, it's easier to square the buildings to each other than it is to try to align them to the road. This just looks a little more correct. If you think about the way the area probably would have developed, the developers would have had to line them up to something. Now it's not perfect, they're still crooked, but I think it looks a little better. I'm also going to be sneaking in a little bit of industry in here. I picked level 5 industry because it's low pollution, low noise, so it's not really going to disturb the neighbors as much. And we're going to trim off that smokestack. I don't want that. I imagine this to be this little really good lunch spot that only the people that work in this area know about. We always have to keep in mind here the climate in the Pacific Northwest is such that if there's a chunk of land that's not being used, not being utilized for anything, given any length of time, a decade or so, it's going to grow in with a lot of trees. That's just comes with the territory here. I wanted a little bit of extra height, so including this office building, I really don't want it to stick out at all, but I just a little bit of elevation to indicate there's a little bit of visual interest. And I have quite a few really awkward spaces in here that I have to figure out different ways to fill in that make some sort of sense. Most of it's parking lots with a little bit of grassy areas and landscaping as well. Now, along the main road, like this 4-lane road, the buildings along this are actually going to orient themselves to the actual road. It's a main thoroughfare, and all the businesses there are trying to attract the people driving by. So yeah, these are all going to be oriented to the road. And final little bit of detailing with some shrubs and trees. Okay, onto our wetland. This is going to be pretty basic. It's just, I think it's the forestry surface to give it a bit of a change in color, to indicate that the land might be a bit wet, marshy. I'm not going to get too fancy here. It's just basically trees. Now there is one more transitional area I need to fill in here, and that's going to be in the next episode. It's going to be a little different, but it is a transitional area and it's fairly common, and a lot of people don't really realize that's the case with it. But you'll have to wait till the next episode to see what that is. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Once again, thank you so much for watching. This episode was a little more focused, just a rather small area, but lots and lots of details. Anyway, I will see you all in the next episode. Bye.